local DJ. Yeah, it's the jumping little record I want my jockey to play. Roll over Beethoven, I gotta hear it again today.
Hello, everybody. Hi, all tonight. This is Alan Freed, the old king of the Moondoggers, and it's time again for another of your favorite rock and roll sections, blues and rhythm records for all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom. Hey, here we go.
Alan Freed, a disc jockey with more hype and heat and enthusiasm than anything that radio had known. And when he played the records, they were wonderfully subversive, dirty records. They sounded so down from Harlem. And I was hooked, and I told Paul, and both of us were regular listeners from 7 to 10, and then it was expanded. I think we had a cream-colored plastic radio, about 12 inches wide. And Alan Freed's show was on WINS, W-I-N-S, 1010 on the dial, a little to the right of center. And you tried to do your homework while you're listening, but homework lost out. And kids would call in with their dedications, from this boyfriend to this girlfriend, listen to this record. And Alan Freed had this wonderfully heated up style. He would pound his telephone book to the backbeats while the record was playing. And we got to hear Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis, and it was so much more interesting than anything going on in the rest of music, and frankly, anything going on in America.
Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? You done started doing the things you used to do. As I was motivating over the hill, I saw Maybelline in a coupe de ville. A Cadillac rolling on an open road, nothing out to run my V8 4. A Cadillac doing about 95, bumper to bumper rolling side to side. Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? You done started back doing the things you used to do.
The kind of excitement generated by Alan Freed for New York teenagers like Art Garfunkel was sadly missing from the radio dial in Britain in the mid-50s. In the States, Freed played a vital part in promoting rock and roll and is even credited with first coining that phrase to describe the new music. But over here, records by Chuck Berry, Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis were played on the radio much less frequently, and never by anyone so full of hype, heat and enthusiasm as Alan Freed. And while American listeners in big cities had a choice of 30 or 40 stations pumping out a non-stop stream of records, the British pop fan had to wait patiently for the occasional rock song to infiltrate the BBC Light programme and Radio Luxembourg. Even a top 20 show was seen as a radical step made by Radio Luxembourg after the war, and its first presenter, Teddy Johnson, didn't originally think much of the idea.
You see, I was playing records that were coming to me fresh from London, which in turn were probably coming in fresh from America. And if I got one which I thought, oh, this is real good, now I'm going to push my neck out here, I would play it as many times as one could without sort of indulging in plugging, as it was called. And, of course, eventually they would become popular, you see. So when it was suggested that we play a programme consisting of best-selling records, I said, well, this is ridiculous, because we are playing all these records on other programmes during the rest of the week. But the governors of the station said, no, we're going to have a programme called Top 20, which will be based on the best-selling sheet music at that time. And, of course, it became the most popular programme. Inside 3 or 4 weeks, it became a fantastic success.
Beloved, be faithful. Beloved, be true. While I am away, dear, I'll trust in you.
Well, that's probably one of the things that changed Teddy Johnson's mind about the Top 20, his own recording of Beloved Be Faithful, which reached number 1 on Luxembourg's chart. But despite its success in audience terms, the station was being run on a shoestring. There just weren't enough advertisers and sponsors. In fact, there weren't enough broadcasters.
Sometimes I'd be on at 10:30 and I would start off and say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is Teddy Johnson, doing a programme now which we call Topical Half Hour. And we would do a programme of topical records, new records. Then I would sign off, say at 11:50, say thank you very much indeed. This is Teddy Johnson. Good night, everybody. Don't forget, I'll be back tomorrow night at the same time. And I would bang the gong, and I would say, "This is Radio Luxembourg, and this is Edward V. Johnson here, presenting a program called Top 20, or Music for Everyone." And then, if that program only lasted half an hour, I would sign off again. This is Edward V. Johnson saying cheerio at 11:30, whatever the time was. And then I would bang the gong and say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is E. Victor Johnson here, presenting a program called Irish Half Hour."
I did find Luxembourg terribly depressing, because Radio Luxembourg in those days was on all day on a Sunday until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I would have to virtually be there all day, apart from an hour's break, when I went back and had something to eat in the hotel. And that's a heck of a long time to say, "This is Radio Luxembourg, this is Radio Luxembourg," hitting gongs all over the place.
Pete Murray joined Radio Luxembourg in 1950, succeeding Teddy Johnson and Roger Moffat. He was an actor and took the job on a temporary basis to earn some cash, but he stayed 5 years. The isolation of Luxembourg and the hard work didn't make life easy out there, but like so many DJs before and since, Pete found the station an invaluable proving ground. His first day in the studio is still a vivid memory.
There was Geoffrey Everett just sitting there and talking, and I said, "Well, I could never do this, just sit there and talk and introduce records." He said, "If you don't do that," he said, "if you start writing script, you'll never be a broadcaster." So I said, "But I mean, I could never think of anything to say." He said, "Look, you can make a heck of a lot of mistakes, but at the same time, you'll learn from those mistakes. You'll always make mistakes, but you do that if you were reading the script anyway." So I took his advice, and I found that I could talk and that I could ad-lib. I always had a completely different outlook when I did a program called Irish Requests, because we had a lot of listeners in Ireland, and I used to do it in a sort of pseudo-Irish voice. "This is your own darling boy, Pete Murray here now." And I used to sing, "If you're Irish, come into the parlour." And then I got lumbered with a program called Cowboy's Lullaby. Now, what the heck I was going to do with that, because I just finished a program of ordinary requests, and there I was, stuck as a cowboy. So I thought, well, I could hardly present that in my own voice, so I called myself Old Pedro, and I used to come on, and I used to do a, and then hit the gong, dong, like I'd spat and the gong had gone off. "Ah, there, friends, this is Radio Luxembourg here. It's your old pal Pedro. Going to present you some really mighty fine Western music, friends, and hope you're going to enjoy it out there. It's really wonderful talking to you." And I used to get a heck of a lot of requests from the Americans saying it's wonderful to have somebody, an old-timer from back home. Well, at that time, I was 23 years of age.
It's such a pity that we can't illustrate the freshness and spontaneity of Luxembourg in the 50s. Very few recordings were made, and shamefully, the station destroyed most of its archive many years ago. Although the English service was popular, the directors of Radio Luxembourg realised that the big money was to be made from broadcasts to France and Germany, where their signal was much stronger. So the long-wave frequency was given to the French service, while the Germans and English shared a new frequency on the medium-wave band.
This is Radio Luxembourg on 208 metres, medium wave. Good evening from yours truly, Geoffrey Everett. In fact, it's a very special good evening. For with us tonight we have the great Stan Kenton.
Geoffrey, before we get into the body of the show, I would like you to know one thing. As I've told you before, how excited and enthused and concerned we all are over the effort on your behalf for progressive music. That's not only our own group, but all of the fellows here in the States feel the same way that I do. And you can't imagine how many times I'm told about what you do with the music and how often it's played and your enthusiasm. And I do appreciate it so much.
Good evening, everybody. This is your friendly station, Radio Luxembourg, calling you on 208 meters medium wave and 49.26 meters shortwave. Your announcer this first half of the evening is Keith Fordyce, and a special warm good evening to you from me, and I hope you'll enjoy all that we have in store for you in the next 6 hours as we're on the air right through until midnight. The time now, when you hear the gong, exactly 6 o'clock.
Well, here we are at the end of the line. You know, we've played a heck of a lot of records in tonight's program, and you may have missed a little bit of information about them, but if you want to get all that information down on paper, so to speak, don't forget to get Records Magazine, price 6pence, now on sale at your local record dealer.
Ah, yes. a good example of the famous Luxembourg fade on 208 metres. Straining to hear the phasing signal became part of the routine for the growing band of listeners under the bedclothes, now that the English service was only broadcast in the evening. And it's worth remembering that, ever conscious of the need to sell advertising, Luxembourg didn't aim its output solely at a young audience. The ITV shows Opportunity Knocks with Hughie Green and Take Your Pick with Michael Miles both began life on the Station of the Stars, amidst a galaxy of other variety shows.
It's Woodbine Quiz Time, and here's the compere of our show, David Jacobs.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Woodbine Quiz Time comes to you tonight from the Ealing Town Hall, so now just sit back in your chairs and relax, because...
The stargazers are on the air.
Stand by for Tune a Minute, presented by Horace Batchelor, famous inventor of the amazing infradraw method.
Sing a song of sunbeams, let the notes fall where they may. Sing a song of sunbeams in the light, fantastic way. Show the blues you're busy, that you just can't be annoyed. And they'll up and go because they know they're null and void.
Greetings and good evening. If you like your music with a kick in it, then let's get together at this same time each week, when we'll be around to bring you a smile and a song in our new streamlined series, A Tune a Minute, to sing the songs we've asked along. June Marlowe.
Hello, everyone.
Kenny Bardell.
Nice to be with you.
Joan Small.
Good evening.
Ray Burns.
Up for the evening.
And with his quartet, our pianist, arranger, conductor and chief bottle washer, Ronnie Aldridge.
Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, everyone.
And with the introductions over, let's start the clock and swing out with A Tune a Minute.
There's a yellow rose in Texas that I am going to see. Nobody else could miss her, not half as much as me.
Those two shows, rare recordings saved by one of Radio Luxembourg's engineers, actually sound more like the BBC's Light programme at the time than most of 208's output. Over at the Beeb, there was the occasional disc show like Children's Favourites, but for the most part, music meant live music. Even the BBC's organisation made their popular music department something quite separate from the gramophone department. What's more, despite their wartime experience with ad-libbing American DJs, BBC executives were still insisting that all record programmes should be scripted. Margaret Hubble presented the very first show of the long-running institution Family Favourites.
Well, I've got a script, the original script, actually, of Family Favourites here, which, would just give you the screaming abdabs, actually, if you look at it, and I'll do a bit for you. The signature tune, even from the start, was With a Song in My Heart, and that was the Andrei Kostelanetz version. On the script it says, BBC passed for security. Even then, we were still censored with every word we said, which was a bit inhibiting, and you'll know what I mean when you hear this script. Hello there. Well, as you've just heard, this is your programme entirely, and the first edition of Family Favourites has been selected from letters we've received from listeners all over Britain. You've asked us to play your tune, and each week at this time we shall endeavour to please you. I've got a good selection of tunes for you to hear this evening. They're quite a mixed bag, and something I hope to please everyone. So here we go. Are you there, Mrs. B. Greenfield, residing at Nitz Hill Road, Thornley Bank, Glasgow? For you, Mrs. Greenfield, Frank Sinatra sings You'll Never Know How Much I Love You.
You'll never know just how much I miss you. You'll never know just how much I care.
The very first thing I wanted to do when I got to London was to hear the BBC. I mean, the BBC. I mean, you know, Jesus second. So I got into this little flat I'd arranged, and I turned on the radio, and I was fiddling about, and all of a sudden I heard Frank Sinatra singing. And the record finished, And this voice came in and said, and that was Frank Sinatra on a gramophone record. I actually fell about. I thought, that's Frank Sinatra on a gramophone record? Well, yes, I would think so. I don't think he flew over especially to sing that one. And I couldn't get over the gentleness of British radio, because I'd come from commercial radio in Australia, where it was all fairly brash and vaguely rather like American radio, and all of a sudden here was this mighty British Broadcasting Corporation, sounding so quiet and so dainty. And I thought, my God, they need a charge here, don't they? And then I went to a party, and a guy said to me, hey, Alan, he said, you're a disc jockey, aren't you? And I said, well, I'm a disc jockey to a point. I'm a presenter, I suppose. I'm a radio announcer, really. He said, well, look, Radio Luxembourg are auditioning disc jockeys for summer relief. He said, why don't you go along as a giggle? So I went off to Luxembourg, and he said, what do you think of radio here? I said, it's a bit dull, love, isn't it?
Well, it wouldn't be too long before Alan Freeman was giving the BBC a bit of a charge, but throughout the 50s, the corporation never expected their announcers to be part of the entertainment or to project their own personalities. After Teddy Johnson had left Radio Luxembourg and scored some success as a singer, he was asked to present the Light programme's famous request show, Housewife's Choice, and found that the BBC was still not ready for DJs.
I realised that I couldn't be quite what I'd been on Luxembourg and telling jokes and being very flippant. You know, rather like Wogan does now, highlights the thing he gets from letters, which I'd been doing on Luxembourg. And I thought, well, you've got to be careful, you can't do that sort of thing. But I did a script for every day, and I made it near enough conversational. So, fine, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I do the programme, and the producer of the programme said, Teddy, we've got a problem. They don't like what you're doing. The people upstairs. So I said, oh, I'm sorry, what don't they like? So she said, well, you know, the various little asides you're putting in, you're changing things, you know. So she said, we'll look at the scripts that you've written, which we've typed out. We'll look at them for the rest of the week. And she went through, well, we can't use that. No, that's too conversational. No, I don't think we can use that. No, that's too, no, take that out. And they took everything out that was really me, I felt. And I never did Housewife's Choice again until 1962, and we're talking about 1951.
We thought, of course, it was the best thing that ever happened to Luxembourg. And I used to say, thank God for the Beeb. There were times after the war when it didn't really have the pulse of the public. They thought Luxembourg was a bit of a joke and would go away, and that nobody really listened. But it was a free and easy, happy-go-lucky station where things happened that wouldn't happen anywhere else. And although I would claim myself, I hope, to be a professional businessman, I think we were a bunch of very happy amateurs, and we didn't try to do things that we couldn't do.
This is your friendly station, great 208, the ring-a-ding swinging station of the stars.
With the Light programme still sounding somewhat frosty in the 50s, Radio Luxembourg enjoyed its heyday. It called itself the Station of the Stars, and even the voices of some of its advertisers became as familiar as any on the radio.
Good evening, friends. This is Horace Batchelor at the microphone, the inventor of the famous infodraw method for the treble chance. I have myself, with my own coupon entries, won 1,012 first treble chance top dividends, and my ingenious method can help you to win also. Don't send any money, just your name and address.
And a whole generation knew that address.
Send now to Horace Batchelor, Department 1, Keynsham, spelt Keynsham, Keynsham, Bristol.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on, join me home. We'll have some fun when the clock strikes 1. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the clock strikes
That was one thing British kids were not going to be able to do. You could hardly rock around the clock when Bill Haley's music was on the radio so rarely. During the day, rock and roll was severely rationed and served up in little segments in amongst the many ingredients of the light programme. Quizzes, radio newsreel, theatre organ music, marching bands, and the other light music, which gave the network its name. David Jacobs was one of the first celebrity record announcers of the 50s, and he presented sponsored shows for Radio Luxembourg, as well as appearing regularly on the BBC. But there was no way he could specialise in rock and roll programmes. Compared to the excitable, hard-sell American DJs, the only thing he had in common was his initials.
I was, I suppose, a disc jockey, but not sounding like a disc jockey of today, because even then everything had to be scripted and worked out. We didn't say things about the day, we said things about the music. And so it was all very, very carefully worked out. It seems almost extraordinary to think that one built programmes of gramophone records and you called it, for example, I did one called Fond Reflections, and it was in the style of a letter to a loved one at home or something. And it was a load of old rubbish, I suppose.
One of David Jacobs' longest-serving producers was Derek Chinnery, a member of the BBC's gramophone department.
I can always remember the very first Elvis Presley arriving on the desk, Heartbreak Hotel, an HMV pop label, which was a relatively new label. Even the word pop was new in a sense. It seems incredible to believe that we couldn't really understand the lyric, or we didn't sort of get the guts of the thing at all. And I remember a departmental meeting we had where the then boss of the department, Anna Instone, asked how many of us on the popular side had heard this record by this fellow called Elvis Presley, a very strange-sounding name. And one or two of us, of course, said we'd heard it. And she said, well, of course, there's really nothing to stop you playing it if you feel you must. But I'll tell you one thing, she said, we'll never have whole programmes of that sort of music on the BBC.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the end of Lonely Street, that Heartbreak Hotel where I'll be just so lonely, baby. Well, I'm so lonely. I'll be just so lonely, I could die. Now the bellhop's tears keep flowing, the desk clerk's dressed in black. Well, they've been so long on the street, they'll never look back and think of so, they'll be just so lonely, baby. Well, they're so lonely, well, they're so lonely, they could die. Well, if your baby leaves you, you got a tale to tell. Well, just take a walk down on the street to Heartbreak Hotel, where you will be so lonely, baby. Well, you'll be lonely. You'll be so lonely, you could die.
In defence of the BBC, it did have a serious problem. The Light programme had been established to serve up entertainment to a generation for whom hits meant popular tunes, not popular discs, and the number of records it could play was limited by a needle time allocation, which ensured musicians' union members were kept busy in BBC studios. Nevertheless, there were BBC people who couldn't understand that an English dance band performing a hit by Elvis Presley or Chuck Berry was no substitute for the real thing. And as Derek Chinnery remembers, so began a long battle between the gramophone department and the popular music department.
The real shift of emphasis was towards the record programmes becoming more important and significant than the traditional live music shows. It sounds so strange today to even think about it in these terms, but the idea of actually saying, let's do a 2-hour programme devoted to pop records because this is something that listeners will be interested in, was a new concept. And there was a lot of discussion as to what this programme would be called. It was to go out on Saturdays. And after a lot of discussion, I remember one of the senior guys in the department saying, why don't we just call it Pick of the Pops?
It's 10:40, time for Pick of the Pops, introduced by David Jacobs.
Number 2 on this week's hit parade is Eden Kane and Well, I Ask You. Numbers 2 and 3, as you see, remain unchanged from last week, and so, for that matter, I'm happy to say, does number 1.
Pick of the Pops was a very important programme, not only for the BBC, but also for me, because I was able to go straight from the studio of Jukebox Jerry, live off the television, to come and present Pick of the Pops live on Sound Radio. So the joint partnership of those programs was terrifically important. It was quite extraordinary that I think in those days it was the only program that was involved solely with pop records. There were other programs which had live groups, but this was the only one that really seemed to hone in. And I think with the new releases we used to give the numbers.
We ain't gonna wash, we ain't gonna wash, we ain't gonna wash for a week.
On Pi 7N15369, that's the Brook Brothers and Ain't A Gonna Wash for a Week. What a dirty record. Here's one that came out a few weeks ago, but stupidly I passed it by, but I think you'll enjoy it.
Pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel, pretty little angel, pretty little, pretty little, pretty little.
Of course, Pick of the Pops soon became forever associated with one man, and when he took over the show in 1961, it was perhaps the first sign of Auntie lifting up her skirts to have some fun.
Before we do spin those top 3 discs of the day, let's meet the man who'll be in charge of Pick of the Pops as of next week, Alan Freeman. All right, Fluffy?
Hi, David.
Tell me just what's going to happen next week.
Well, next week in Pick of the Pops, we're going to have 3 20-minute segments. In the first 2 segments of 20 minutes, we're going to present the new discs, the new releases. I hope I have the same wisdom as you in picking them. And from 11:20, all the current top 20 hit paraders.
All the current top 21?
Well, not all of them, but some of them.
Yes.
Most of them.
You will.
The good ones.
All right, then. Well, we look forward to listening to you, and I'd like to wish you every possible success with what, to me, has been a jolly fun program to do.
Hi there, pop pickers. It's me again, and Sunday at 4 means Pick of the Pops.
I thought that radio generally needed a bit of brightening up. I thought we need a bit more drud. That's because I had been influenced, really, by what I'd heard in Australia and worked amongst, and from what I'd heard from America. Because, you see, back in Australia, you kept your job because you were a good seller. If you were doing a show, say, as I was, the Oxford show, you had to read these commercials while you were actually doing your show, and if you didn't sell, you were out. So, of course, I think more than anything, I developed the art of selling, and then all of a sudden I found that what I liked about what I was doing, even in playing records, I liked the sell. And the great kick that I've always got out of jockeying is to actually be excited about the product if one really believes in it. I always think that any jockey who plays records and is not excited by what he's playing anyway, then I think he's got it slightly wrong. All right.
But Pick of the Pops with Fluff was still a rare thing on the Light programme, a show consisting entirely of gramophone records. Frustrated by the lack of exposure for their products on the BBC, the record companies were flocking to Radio Luxembourg's London office to buy time for their own sponsored programmes.
Well, what do you know? It's the Capital Show! The big top's a blaze of light, and this is Ray Orchard inviting toppers everywhere to gather round as for the next 30 minutes we call into the center ring these Capital Stars. Dean Martin, Tommy Sands, Ray Anthony, and Andy Griffith. Baron Young, Jackie Davis, Dean Reed, and the Andrews Sisters. Frank Sinatra, Richard Cannon, Gene Vincent, and the Rinky Dinks. Can't wait for you to hear this, so we start with a never-before-played cap waxing, the new one by the Kingston Trio.
EMI, Decca, Warner Brothers, all the companies had their own shows on Radio Luxembourg. And as the late, great DJ Roger Scott remembered in an archive interview, these programmes and new releases were vital for pop fans.
I very quickly discovered Radio Luxembourg, as we all did. Well, it was a very shared experience in those days. It was a very universal experience. Everybody went the same route. You had such a limited amount of rock and roll music on the radio. that everybody listened to the same things. You listened to Radio Luxembourg, had your favourites on there, especially the shows that featured London American records.
Searchin' by the Coasters was one of the many R&B records released on Decca's London American label. And it was company employee Tony Hall who presented so many great records you'd never hear on the BBC.
Obviously, Luxembourg was the only alternative, and the record companies would buy space, airtime on Luxembourg, because BBC wouldn't touch the majority of their American product, rather too raucous, can't have all this nonsense on BBC. And I capitalised on this because I really didn't want my programme cluttered up with some of the more, shall we say, vomit-making of the English recordings, because some of them at that era were really bad quality. So I devised this idea called America's Hot 10. And the gimmick was to take the Billboard charts of that week, the Hot 100, and to pick out the 10 Decca Group records which were highest in the chart. So that way I got some fantastic records which I really could relate to, and which would normally not get any airplay at all, but I sort of forced even Decca to expose them. And this applied to early Motown things came out on London, especially the Atlantic stuff.
My baby, hello, stranger.
At one stage in the 60s, well, for several years actually, I lived in a flat maisonette in Green Street in Mayfair, and across the road was George Harrison and Ringo, and we became very close. And actually, I was very proud. George used to listen to my Luxembourg programs, the America's Hot 10 thing, and he would take the mickey out of the fact that I was pushing one record in particular, Barbara Lewis, Hello Stranger. I played it every week or something for 13 weeks and was pleading for people to buy it, and of course nobody did. But George taped this and would take the mickey out of me, something rotten over that record. But it was a great record, and I'm very honoured that George took the time and trouble to take the mickey.
It seems like a mighty long time. Chibop, chibop, my baby, ooh. It seems like a mighty long time.
It does make me smile wryly when I hear DJs on Radio 1, 2, whatever, or even commercial stations talking about playing great oldies, which they never played in their lives and they would have turned up their noses at.
Another essential programme on Luxembourg was presented by a DJ with all the enthusiasm of the American jocks, but with a relaxed and jovial manner that was very English. Jimmy Savile.
I was the number one dancehall DJ in the country because there weren't any more. I started playing records in dance halls. It was a thing I'd tried for 10 years to do, and nobody had stand for it. They laughed at me. They literally laughed at me. They said, you can't dance to records, you need a band. I said, no, it's a fantastic idea. 10 years. Now then, after 10 years, I finished up running 52 Mecca halls as their DJ in charge. I had about 400 disc jockeys working for me at the time. And a guy walked into the dance hall that I was at in Leeds, and he said, I've never seen anybody operate like you in my life. That's for sure. And he said, you've got to come on Radio Luxembourg.
Jimmy was an immediate success, and millions tuned in each week to hear the opening words of his most famous programme, the Teen and 20 Disc Club.
Hi there, guys and girls. Welcome to the TTDC. It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday night, and all Teen and 20 Disc Club members will be here, and then I'll go off, you see. And I had great things like Under the Bedclothes Club, because I used to work from the public outwards. In other words, I would learn from the public and then put what I'd learned from the public through the radio. A lot of people don't work that way. They try to impose things. I never tried to impose anything. And I used to get complaints from guys and girls at school who must listen to the TTC, but it's 10 o'clock at night. Therefore, it's after the lights out, right? So therefore, they had the tranny, because trannies in those days were now becoming big business, and they had a transistor radio in bed with them, right? So I did a deal with all prefects, and this worked through countless hundreds of schools, and that is that TTDC time, nobody got nicked. And my mother, God bless her soul, was most startled when girls used to say, "Oh, you're Jimmy's mother. Oh, I'm under the bedclothes with him."
What a lunatic you are, Perth, driving like that. I know we're in a hurry and guys, gals and groups are going to... Ladies and gentlemen, here we are, Percy and Jimmy Savile, the Savile twins, tonight to bring to your delight music and pictures, because we are going to show you the pictures of the artists as we play them tonight on Guys, Gals and Groups. And for those of you whose radio set to receive pictures, you will be in for a great time, because we are going to produce them from our cinema here. So let's go inside and swat with them. It's a bit cold in here, personally. Let's crank the gear up. There. Let's get it going. There we are. Now then, from America, we have got a piece of film here depicting our very good friend, member number 11321, Elvis.
Return to sender. Return to sender. I gave a letter to the postman. He put it in his sack. Bright and early next morning, he brought my letter back. She wrote upon it, return to sender.
Jimmy Savile's only British predecessor in the art of creative DJing was the great Jack Jackson. A popular band leader before the war, he developed a presentation style that was witty and technically brilliant. And what's more, he sounded like he was having fun.
Hello there, record lovers everywhere, and welcome to Record Roundabout. Now, I think you'll all agree that we cannot be left behind in this world space race.
If we'd had our own rocket, I'd have been the first one up there. Had me named down for the blue streak, but no, we missed our chance again. It's not right having these foreigners hurtling round up there. You mark my word.
Enough. Today we present a journey to the planet Uranus. Yes, you heard. With astronaut third class Anthony Rocket Hancock.
Don't touch it!
Too late.
Oh, no more curried eggs for me.
Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And so I come to you, my love, my heart above my head. Though I see the danger there, if there's a chance for me, then I don't care. Fools rush in where wise men never go, but wise men never fall in love, so how are they to know? When we met, I felt my life begin, so open up your heart and let this fool rush in.
And on Radio Luxembourg, Jack Jackson's show was introduced by one of the most famous jingles of the day.
And hello there, record fans, wherever you are. Once again, it's time for another roundup of all your favourite British and American recording artists brought to you by the Decker Record Company for your special delight tonight. Oh, excuse me, madam.
Yes?
I work for Luxembourg, you see.
Oh, I am sorry. I'm afraid I can't help you.
No. I was hoping you'd play chaperone to this young fellow.
Well, I never felt more like singing the blues, 'cause I never thought that I'd lose your love, dear. Watch you to be this way. Well, I never felt more like crying all night, 'cause everything's wrong and nothing ain't right without you. You got me singing the blues.
But back at the Light programme, Jack Jackson's show and Pick of the Pops were two of a very small number of programmes aimed at young listeners. At 5 o'clock each weekday, there was a half-hour slot called Teenager's Turn, and half an hour was your lot for the day. But on the weekend, everyone listened to Saturday Club and Easy Beat, both presented by Brian Matthew.
Now, the BBC might have started in a more diffident fashion, but when it got into it, and Saturday Club emerged from Skiffle Club and was a 2-hour programme, it was the only major national programme that was, in fact, bringing in these groups and kids and youngsters, quite definitely in many cases, not with an eye to their quality, but with a very, very serious consideration of what they were contributing to a whole new movement.
Yes, this is our 5th birthday show, and the stars who've come along to join us in the party are, for the first time ever on British radio, the Everly Brothers, Frank Ifield, Kenny Ball's band, Joe Brown, Clinton Ford, Tommy Rowe, Kathy Kirby, the Beatles, and many more. Of course, you're invited too, so come on, everybody.
There was a very illustrious announcer, now deceased, with whom I'd worked and under whom I'd trained as a sort of here's the news type announcer. And he approached me in the club one day after one of these broadcasts, and he said, "I'd like to punch you on the bloody jaw." And I said, "What for?" He said, "What you're doing to English and to broadcasting." So, just what can you do except smile and say, "Want to know the drink?" So that perhaps represented the establishment view. They were a bit suspicious of it. But as in all instances, the BBC, when suspicious of a departure, ceases to be so when the audience research figures indicate they're on a winner.
Easy Beat!
Hello, mates, and here we go. And this one's designed to get everyone in a happy mood. Happy Jose.
I don't think I was particularly conscious of any deliberate attempt to fashion a style that was different and new. It was still scripted. I mean, I still wrote what I said, but literally scribbled it out in the studio. I know I used to refer to myself as your old mate when I did Saturday Club. It was one of those things that slipped out. It wasn't contrived and it wasn't fashioned for any specific purpose. I think if you get it right and you are interested in what you're doing and you sell it as it deserves to be sold, and I don't mean promoting stuff that you've got no faith in, just trying to push everything. I don't mean that at all. I mean presenting it as honestly as you know. If you're lucky, you will coincidentally sell something, call it personality, sell what it is you have personally, that is you, that's your own chemistry.
Well, now we'd like you all to meet our two guest stars who are headlining a package over here at the moment, Don and Phil Everly. Don and Phil, it's great to have you back on the show. Welcome back to Saturday Club and back to Britain.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I imagine that you're feeling a little bit tired. Haven't you been having a hectic time, Don?
Just a little bit tired. It hasn't been that hectic, though. It's been a lot of fun. We've been in Europe now for like 3 weeks, doing one-nighters.
You like playing here, Phil?
Yes, I do. I enjoy the British audience. It's a great audience to play for.
Well, they certainly enjoy your work. I hear the show's going really well over here. Now then, I think we'd like to listen to some music right now.
Glad to do it.
I
Saturday Club could only feature a handful of records during its 2 hours, but through the efforts of pioneering producers Bernie Andrews and Jimmy Grant, it certainly attracted the stars to record exclusive sessions.
And another thing.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Saturday Club. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Saturday Club. Happy birthday to you.
Isn't that nice? Thank you, dear Beatles.
The Beatles performed 10 times on Saturday Club, and even during the chaos of the group's first hectic day in New York in February 1964, they made time to talk to their old mate back in London.
Before we went on the air, I spoke direct to the boys in New York, and here's a recording of our conversation. First on the line was Paul, and I asked him for his impression of the scene on their arrival.
It was fantastic, you know, because we just didn't believe it, sort of leaving England and you know, it was a great send-off from England. We thought, well, you know, they couldn't be as good as that. But when we arrived, it all just sort of hanging all over the airport. Fantastic, lovely though. Yeah, and we were just sort of driving along and listening to the DJ show on the radio. And as we were going along, it was reporting it, you know, and the fellow saying, and in 20 minutes' time we were going to switch over to the Plaza Hotel, New York. You know, and it's great, marvellous. And just as we were getting out of the car, he said, we hear they've arrived now. Fantastic, you know. And one of the DJs said he's thinking, he's hoping that he can fly the Miracles in. And the Isley Brothers are in town. Fantastic, you know, I can't wait to see him.
That DJ was, of course, the quiet, unassuming Murray the K.
This is Murray the K, Simon the T, and as the fifth Beatle, I am delighted to bring you the pick of the week, baby.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand when I say that something. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand.
Murray the K, I thought was wonderful. 10:10 wins New York, the swinging soiree with Murray the K, who attached himself like a leech to the Beatles and became the fifth Beatle, ingratiated himself with Epstein, but was a great jock all the same.
Now let me hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand.
In the early 60s, Roger Scott was working as a merchant seaman and consequently discovered new radio stations that eclipsed the light and luxury of his school days.
It was hearing all the other things coming in as you go around the coast of America or to the American Forces Network. Hear the American Forces Network coming out of Vietnam at the time, or from Japan, and just totally different and totally alien to anything I'd heard before, and so exciting. And a madman at WKBW in Buffalo called Joey Reynolds, who was probably not the biggest influence, but I just couldn't believe what he was doing. I mean, he did his whole show. Whether he did it or not, I don't know. But I just remember one night he did his whole show locked in the shower. He was having a shower for his whole show and did nothing but play a Four Seasons record. And this was when I was still at sea, and I heard him when I was out on the ocean. What is this man doing? He's locked himself in the shower. You can hear the water. He is showering. He's playing his Four Seasons record. And it was Big Girls Don't Cry. And he played the thing back to back, non-stop, for 4 hours. And I heard the whole thing for 4 hours. And you didn't get this on the Light programme. Brian Matthew did not do that.
Silly boy. Oh, my girl, we had to break up. Silly boy. But that she would call my phone. Silly boy. When she said, to my surprise, big girls don't cry. Big
Soon the genial but sensible Brian Matthew would be facing some madcap competition in Britain when an armada of new radio stations sailed onto the scene. The idea of avoiding the BBC's monopoly by broadcasting from a ship in international waters was nothing new. Back in the 1920s, the Daily Mail had chartered a yacht to sail around the British coast transmitting dance music and advertisements. But the scheme failed when the old gramophone needles kept skipping off the records. In the 30s, offshore radio wasn't necessary because the International Broadcasting Company proved any number of land-based European stations were prepared to sell airtime for English broadcasts. But after the war, legislation was tightened up, and only the Luxembourg government would sanction a regular service to Britain. So, as the demand for pop radio grew, broadcasting from the high seas seemed to look like the only answer. From 1958, ships anchored off the coasts of Denmark, Sweden and Holland began broadcasting to those countries. All that was needed for British radio to be revolutionised was for one businessman to take a risk. And the story of pirate radio began one night in 1963 in a sweaty London nightclub called the Flamingo.
Yeah, here we go now. Georgie Fame, the Blue Flames, and let's listen to Night Train.
In the audience for Georgie Fame's regular Saturday gig at the Flamingo was a rich young Irishman who was astonished to find that the talented R&B singer didn't have a record contract.
I remember being absolutely knocked out, and afterwards I got chatting and I said, well, did anyone think of, he said no. So I put together a recording thing and a studio thing, and then I discovered that there was nowhere to play the thing. If EMI and Decca didn't take him. And so I remember saying, right, I'll bring out my own record label, which was really stupid because, you couldn't get distribution, you couldn't get anything, it was all locked up. And I went along and I thought, well, I got to get Luxembourg, to play this thing. A few hours at night that you could hear now and again. And I remember sitting with the head of Luxembourg and I said to him, look, how many times can you play this? And he said, look, we can't play this thing at all. Then I said, we've got to start a radio station anyway.
So Ronan O'Reilly set off to find a suitable ship which he could anchor just outside the 3-mile limit and use as a floating radio station to broadcast, among other things, his Georgie Fame record. But he was not alone. Another offshore radio group had been set up by an Australian music publisher called Alan Crawford.
I happened to go and visit a ship called Radio Nord, which was doing exactly the same thing up in the Baltic, and I met the people running it, who happened to be a couple of Texans, and became very friendly with them. And they took the ship back to Texas, and we bought it there. A couple of $100,000, I think.
Alan Crawford and Ronan O'Reilly will both claim they thought of British pirate radio first. In fact, it seems they happened upon it quite coincidentally. When they did finally discover each other's plans, they struck a deal whereby both ships, O'Reilly's Frederica and Crawford's Mi Amigo, would be fitted out together. In great secrecy, the two parties started buying equipment, hiring engineers, and carrying out work in the O'Reilly family port just north of Dublin, called Greenore.
Apparently it had been many years before a popular resort, and there were railway lines rusting, running away from the dock. There were stones missing from the dock and grass a foot high in all directions, and it was really quite a neglected area. And fascinating to see these two ships battling away, building masts and so on all over the place.
Of course, when the mast started to go up, people started to talk, obviously, what in the world is this? And somebody concocted the most wonderful story. They said that, in fact, it was like a periscope upside down, and that it was for finding sponges. And everybody around that area accepted that story 100%.
Ronan was able to buy his ship, the Frederica, locally, whereas I had to go back to Houston, so that when it came into harbour, his ship was already tied up, and ours had to moor alongside, one ship away from the wharf, so that we had to climb aboard his ship first to get to ours. And relations were quite strained because there was a strenuous attempt to delay us, which succeeded, in fact.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was real Pirates at Penzance. I mean, it was very funny, actually, because it was sort of cutthroat rivalry, which just sort of ended up with people nicking crystals out of one transmitter and putting the wrong ones in and all silly stuff. They were at a slight disadvantage in terms of a sort of rivalry thing because, of course, it was my family's port and they did look after us, you know.
And so it was that Ronan O'Reilly's ship sailed out of port and into the history books as the first British pirate radio station. It was Easter Sunday, March 1964.
This is Radio Caroline on 199, your all-day music station. We are on the air every day from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. The time right now is 1 minute past 12, and that means it's time for Christopher Moore.
Hello and happy Easter to all of you. This is Christopher Moore with the first record program on Radio Caroline. The first record is by the Rolling Stones, and I'd like to play it for all of the people who worked to put the station on the air, and particularly for Ronan.
The Story of Pop Radio is written and produced by Trevor Dan and Kevin Howlett, and I'm Noel Edmonds. Thank you for listening.